Hello, everyone. So today we are going to get into the rise of the Soviet Union underneath Joseph Stalin, who was often referred to as the Man of Steel as well. But real quick, so post-Civil War, Soviet Union, 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is officially formed, and Lenin will institute some new economic policies, also known as the NEP. And so, what we will have here is this is a modified version of capitalism. Peasants, small retail stores, and small industries will actually be allowed to operate under private ownership. Heavy industry, banking, and mines will be under government control. So it's like communism, kind of, sort of, okay? And the positives of this is that they will have some economic growth, and harvests are going well, so people actually have money. But overall, heavy industry is still a little bit behind where people would necessarily want it to be. The other part of this is that the bureaucracy is growing quite a bit. Underneath the communist system, there will be thousands and thousands of people that are running the government, and they will actually slowly but surely be forming an elite group within the state, which actually wasn't supposed to happen, and that's going to lead to some issues further down the road. Then, in 1924, Lenin dies, and what we will have develop here is a power struggle. On the right, top right, that is the outside of Lenin's tomb, and on the bottom right is his quote-unquote coffin, where his body is preserved, and you can go see him if you're into that thing, I guess. Now, there would be two guys kind of involved in the power struggle. One of them will be Joseph Stalin. Now, Joseph Stalin did have an early career. He was one of the key kind of players in the revolution and eventually getting the communists to get to power. He was really more of a behind-the-scenes organizer for the army and the party, and he was just really good at those kind of technical things to keep everything logistically going well. Eventually, after the war, he will become the general secretary of the party. And after Lenin's death, he is going to be very, very big on trying to get people to view him as like Lenin's heir apparent. He actually organized most of the funeral, as you see him on the front there, actually carrying the casket. He's in the actual front over here, the front right, so that's crucial. He actually gives the funeral oration. He immediately starts a program in which like they're going to build statues and other things to honor Lenin, and really trying to convince the people by using propaganda that like he's the guy. Now, there are some concerns, though, about Stalin. Lenin basically left a testament behind, and in that testament, he started to have some misgivings about Stalin, some, real clarity, actually, in that that Stalin basically should not be allowed to be in power. That is what he specifically wrote, and he foresaw some possible problems and that things could get really bad. Of course, things are going to get really bad. But here's the deal. The Politburo, who was a committee of 7 men and some other influencers with them, was supposed to kind of take over after Lenin died, and they were looking for someone to kind of be a leader here. There were a number of men on the Politburo, and they make the decision to not expose Lenin's testament. There are some stories that Stalin actually stole it and got rid of it, but we can't really confirm or deny them. But we know that the Politburo decides not to release it because Lenin was also critical of a number of them. Okay, so that's how Stalin becomes kind of the general secretary of the party. They give him a position that they don't think he can do a lot of damage in, but in the end, it's actually not going to work out really well. Now, within the Politburo itself, there were also kind of two dividing factions over what they should be doing, if you will, with leadership after the war. There was the left that was headed by Leon Trotsky. That's this guy over here. Here's a picture of him with Lenin. Of course, here's Stalin with Lenin as well. So these two, of course, were going to end up butting heads. And Trotsky was a brilliant military leader. He was really crucial for them actually winning the Civil War. And what he wants to do is he feels that the government should go in a direction that they need to get like pure communism in. We need to push massive industrialization and try to push communism to other countries. The right, on the other hand, of which Joseph Stalin was a part of, wanted to focus on socialism and improve the lives of the peasants and actually keep the NEP itself. And when it looked like and that's why Stalin actually ends up throwing in with them, because he feels that the right has a better chance of kind of coming out on top of this and that he can kind of emerge as their leader as well. Now, eventually being Stalin, he is going to be able to get power because as general secretary of the Communist Party, he got to appoint thousands of bureaucracy positions, making it very specific that those guys were going to be loyal to him because he was the one that gave them their position, and slowly getting more legal control of the actual party. And in the end, he ends up getting Trotsky banished from the party in 1927, and as a result, he then the next year will leave Russia in exile. I'm not going to go all the ins and outs of like how that happened. That's an entire video on itself. I'm sure you can find that out. But Stalin was not going to accept that, and in 1940 he would have him assassinated in Mexico. Guy killed him with an ice pick. Just terrible. Just absolutely terrible. So with that, Stalin is able to get control of the Politburo and basically control of the country. And now we go to the reign of the Man of Steel now that he is in power. You know, Superman way cooler, Stalin not so much, but this is what he was known as. He was pretty much a terrible individual. I mean, I can't get it. You know, he's going to be responsible for millions of deaths, but like his daughter ends up fleeing from the country away from him. He actually, his son suffered from a variety of issues as a young man, actually tried to commit suicide, and then when he was unsuccessful, his father berated him for something else he failed. Like, this is how terrible a dad he is. And actually, his son would die in a German prison camp during World War II, even after the Germans said, okay, we have your son, what do you want for him? And he basically said no and let him rot in jail. So he's terrible. Positives, I guess. He does massively reform the educational system in Russia and really puts a big push on like engineering, the education. Believe it or not, even though women aren't going to have a lot of rights underneath him, which I'll talk about, they could go to school, and if they showed aptitude, they could go to college and get those positions. And the benefit of educational reform here is you see a bunch of kids eating in a cafeteria with, you know, Lenin looking on, because remember I said he did all those things to honor Lenin. It would provide people, really the only way to rise up underneath communism was through education. And if you got a good education and showed them your, you know, your abilities, you had a shot to move up in the ranks. Otherwise, you basically couldn't. So it was also, I mean, the schooling was better, and Russian engineers are going to do a lot of great things and stuff like that, but it's still going to be relatively few people. Russia, Stalin himself is going to look at Russia, and even though early on he's in favor of the NEP, he's basically going to throw that all out the window with the introduction of a variety of 5-year plans, and we'll talk about the first one because they all are kind of terrible. And the first one was basically, the idea behind it was that we're going to ignore the desire for like making consumer goods and stuff like that, and we're going to focus on armament, heavy machinery, and oil capacity. And they're actually going to double their oil capacity. And the idea is to get Russia to be this just juggernaut of an army, this juggernaut of heavy industry. You see them on the bottom left, they're building cars, but we're not really going to care about anything else. This is what we're going to do. Now, technically, in what the 5-year plan was supposed to do economically, in the realm of huge amount of army, big time heavy industry, that did work, but there would be some major fallout. Cities were actually not prepared for the influx of workers that it would take to do this, and people were forced to live in beyond squalid conditions. Basically, think like London in 1805. Disease and poor sanitation. It was just awful. Wages will actually drop significantly as a result of this because they're trying to cut costs as much as they can to build all the industrial goods that they want. Workers were also prevented from moving around. It was almost like they became serfs again, in a very similar way to what we saw in 1800s and prior Russia. And they used propaganda to fuel all of this. And again, the reason why is because Stalin has decided to try to make Russia a world power, and this is just how it's going to work. Now, in order to feed everybody and control all of that, they also develop another 5-year plan, which is going to focus on um, agricultural collectivization. Okay, and this is going to be just a catastrophic failure. The thought behind it was that there were too many privately held farms, and what you're going to do is collectivize all of those private farms into government run farms. And what the other thing you were going to do behind it is to remove people that could possibly cause him problems. There was a group called the kulaks, who were Kulaks, who were wealthy farmers that had a lot of pull in these areas. And so what he would do, he would go in, he would arrest the families of the kulaks and send them off to jails. I'll get into that later. And then force everybody to work on these farms and basically work them to have food for the people in the factories. Now, the thing is, if peasants didn't necessarily agree with this, he would specifically make sure to take their food and starve them. You see this just brutal farm conditions over here. You see these kids who were alive during the time of collectivization. And basically, you ended up getting man-created famines that hit in specifically 1932, 33, and 34. And we estimate that as a result of collectivization, Stalin killed at least 8 to 10 million of his own people, particularly in the Ukraine. They are going to be the hardest hit of all of these areas. Other than that, he then needs to purge people. Anyone who could challenge his power was seen as a threat, was executed or put in jail. There would be trials. The picture on the left there is a trial. And basically, army officers, diplomats, union officials, party members, intellectuals, and even regular people. Approximately 8 million people would be arrested due to his purges. Millions of them would die. I've seen estimates that Stalin has killed, his actions were, resulted in the deaths of 20 to 25 million people. I don't know that we'll ever really know, but let me give you an idea of what these prisons were like. They were called gulags, and I think it sounds bad, so let's learn about them real quick.
Gulags, the Soviet Union. Gulags, or Main Administration of Corrective Labor Camps, were forced labor camps in the Soviet Union, created under Vladimir Lenin after the Russian Revolution, but made famous during the Stalin era. Prisoners would come into the gulags in large numbers during the years of collectivization of Soviet agriculture from 1929 to 1932, the peak of Stalin's purges during the late 30s and after World War II. Rich peasants called kulaks, criminals, Axis prisoners, dissident intellectuals, political and religious prisoners, and even innocent people were sent to the gulags as threat to Stalin's regime. Most of the gulag camps were located in the bitter cold wilderness of Siberia. The camps would be surrounded by barbed wire and fencing, with guard towers watching over any potential escape attempts. As well as the cold, disease, hunger, and violence were a common, everyday occurrence. Overcrowding was a big problem in the camps, and barracks were tightly packed, with lice infestations and poor heating. Prisoners were made to do forced labor such as chopping wood, mining, or constructing industrial projects. Refusal could result in starvation or execution. Some prisoners, rewarded with better rations, were also chosen as informers to report on the behavior of fellow inmates. For misbehaving prisoners, the guards would put them in solitary confinement cells, which were extremely cold and damp, with rations every few days. The odds of survival were low. Millions of Soviet citizens were sent to the gulags for going against Stalin's hardline communist rule in a time of paranoia. Following Stalin's death in 1953, gulags became less harsh, and many prisoners were freed, reducing gulags in size significantly, but the system would exist all the way up until the Gorbachev era.
Subscribe for more history videos.
So
Get Simple History, the Cold War.
There we go, finally paused it. As you can see, just absolute brutality. And just to finish up Stalin here, women, very similar to Mussolini. It was all about, ironically, then he was also about increasing the population that he was killing left and right. Bizarre. But that women should be in the home and that women should not really be out and working. As a result, he also limited the rights of divorce. So as well, women couldn't get out of marriages, although men who were divorced and didn't properly take care of their children would face heavy fines. So I guess that's good. I don't know. Abortion is specifically outlawed. Homosexuality, I skipped propaganda, I'll get back to it. Homosexuality is also labeled as a crime. So now people can go to jail for that. And propaganda is going to run all of this. It is going to, encourage women to get to have children. It's going to encourage people to point out criminal behavior. It's going to encourage people to point out possible homosexuals and people for the purges. And again, you just get this brutal dictatorship that develops and going to be one of the hallmarks of this era from 1919 to 1939. Okay, all right, guys. Well, thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you again soon.